You're traveling through the unknown, a journey beyond the corners of reality, where the shadows whisper and the chill runs deep. Welcome to the dimension where your deepest fears are given form. This is The Midnight Mystery.
Welcome to The Midnight Mystery. This episode is called The Last Broadcast. In each episode, we delve into the shadowed corners of our existence, bringing you tales of the eerie, the uncanny, and the downright terrifying. From the realms of the supernatural to the depths of the human psyche, no stone is left unturned, no dark secret left hidden. This episode is a chilling tale about Alex Thompson, a dedicated journalist turned podcast host, known for his true crime podcast. His show takes a terrifying turn when a mysterious caller, John Doe, begins contributing insightful comments on the infamous Moonlight Sonata killer case, a cold case that has haunted the city for years. As the clock once again draws near midnight, prepare to embark on another adventure into the uncanny, the eerie, the horrifying, the midnight mystery. Alex Thompson wasn't always the host of a popular true crime podcast. He had begun his career as an investigative journalist. Born and raised in the city of New Haven, Alex had always been fascinated by mysteries, largely fueled by his mother's collection of Agatha Christie novels. His knack for asking the right questions and his insatiable curiosity made journalism an ideal career path. He worked his way up from a local reporter covering mundane town events to an investigative journalist for the New Haven Chronicle. His big break came when he unmasked a high-profile corruption scandal within the city government. He was relentless, chasing leads and piecing together a puzzle that most didn't even realize existed. His work earned him not just accolades, but also a reputation for being unafraid to dive into the city's underbelly. Despite his success, the world of print journalism was dwindling, with digital media offering a more immediate and visceral connection with the audience. It was during this period that Alex discovered the growing world of podcasts. A new form of storytelling, it offered a unique platform to bring his passion for investigative journalism to a broader audience. He launched Voices in the Dark, a late-night true crime and mystery podcast, to delve into unsolved mysteries and cold cases. It was an instant hit. His listeners loved his soothing voice, his thoughtful narration, and the eerie thrill of unraveling real-life mysteries. It was like being in a detective's mind, sifting through clues and speculations, challenging assumptions and questioning the unexplained. Alex found the transition from journalism to podcasting a challenging yet satisfying journey. Podcasting was a different beast, requiring him to not just investigate, but also entertain. He was the researcher, the storyteller, and the voice that connected the tale to the listeners. He took to the task with fervor, constantly improving his delivery, pacing, and narrative style. Despite the switch in mediums, Alex's goal remained the same: to uncover the truth. He took pride in giving a voice to victims whose stories hadn't found closure, serving a virtual congregation of true crime enthusiasts, and shedding light on unresolved mysteries. Yet, as his audience grew, so did an underlying sense of dread. He was stirring the pot, bringing forgotten horrors back into public consciousness. There was always the fear of retaliation, but Alex was a journalist at heart. He believed in his work, and that belief was enough to keep him going, even as the voices in the dark grew closer. Tonight, dear listeners, we traverse the cold, haunting memories of our city. Memories of a time of fear, when darkness fell not just on our streets but our hearts, as we lived under the shadow of a predator lurking amongst us, the Moonlight Sonata killer. Alex's voice echoed through the podcast. The Moonlight Sonata killer emerged from the depths of the city's shadows, a faceless entity whose reign of terror lasted for 2 grueling years. From 2018 to 2020, New Haven lived in a perpetual state of fear, as the serial killer claimed one victim after another, leaving behind a chilling signature: an earpiece playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. What began as an isolated, gruesome murder gradually transformed into a horrifying pattern that gripped the city. The victims varied in age, gender, and socioeconomic status. The only commonality, aside from their untimely death, was the classical sonata playing in their ears and the full moon that hung high on the night of their demise. Alex vividly remembered reporting on the first murder. A 32-year-old schoolteacher, Amanda Clark, was found in her home, an eerie melody flowing from the earpiece set snugly in her ear. She was the first, but not the last. Over 2 years, 12 victims fell prey to this faceless murderer. The city was under siege, the police under unprecedented pressure, and the citizens locked their doors once the sun set, dread pooling in their hearts as moonlight washed over New Haven. Perhaps the most bone-chilling aspect of these murders was not just the ghastly scene that met the investigators, but the fact that there was no apparent struggle. It was as though the victims were in a trance, willingly following their killer, entranced by the haunting melody of the Moonlight Sonata, Alex continued, an edge to his voice. The police were initially optimistic about the case. The killer's calling card was distinctive, the pattern specific. But it soon became apparent that these clues led nowhere. There were no fingerprints, no trace of DNA, no surveillance footage, and no witnesses. As if the killer was a ghost, disappearing with the moonlight, only to reappear on the next full moon. The breakthrough everyone had hoped for never came. The murders abruptly stopped in the fall of 2020, the killer vanishing as mysteriously as they had appeared. The Moonlight Sonata killer was never identified, the case eventually going cold, leaving behind a city scarred and a dozen families mourning. And so, Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. Despite all our advancements, our digital surveillance, DNA forensics, and dedicated detectives, the Moonlight Sonata killer remains a phantom, a chilling reminder of our vulnerability and the questions that haunt us. Who was behind these monstrous acts? Why did they stop? And most importantly, where are they now? Alex paused, the silence punctuated only by the soft strains of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata playing in the background. Perhaps some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, echoing in our memories, like a haunting melody in the dark. As Beethoven's sonata faded away, Alex opened the lines for calls. He was met with the usual mix of theories and fears, the shared fascination and dread for the night's subject. Just as he was about to wrap up the session, a call came through. "Hello, Alex." The caller's voice was calm, collected, a stark contrast to the uneasy callers that had come before him. "Let's call me John Doe." "Well, hello, John Doe. I'm glad you called in. What are your thoughts on the Moonlight Sonata killer?" Alex asked, intrigued by the man's composure. John's insights were unlike any Alex had heard. He spoke about the killer's choice of Beethoven's sonata, how it was more than a signature, but a symbol of the killer's sophistication and his psychological state. He discussed how the moon was not just a schedule, but a symbolic ally for the killer, suggesting a deeper connection with lunar cycles. John's words seemed to dissect the cold case with an unusual precision, an intimate understanding that both intrigued and unnerved Alex. He had spoken to many analysts, criminologists, and psychologists on his show, but never had he encountered a caller whose understanding of a serial killer seemed so immersive. The listeners were equally enthralled. Messages flooded in, praising John Doe's analysis, asking for more insights. The social media buzzed with speculation about John Doe's identity, some even wildly guessing him to be a retired detective or a criminology professor. By the end of the night, #John Doe was trending, and so began the fascinating yet eerie interaction with John Doe. Each call shed more light on the elusive Moonlight Sonata killer, his methods, his likely psychology, and even theories about why he might have stopped. Every new revelation seemed to peel back a layer, drawing the listeners further into the chilling labyrinth. Alex, too, was hooked. While John Doe's insights sometimes sent chills down his spine, his journalist's curiosity was piqued. Each call felt like an enigma, a challenge to his investigative skills. Who was John Doe? How did he possess such detailed knowledge about a cold case? But despite his best efforts, Alex came up empty-handed. The intrigue surrounding John Doe grew with each call. The listeners, too, became obsessed with the mystery caller. The podcast's ratings soared, as did the theories around John Doe's identity. Some listeners even speculated about John's uncanny understanding of the Moonlight Sonata killer, darkly hinting at the possibility of him being the killer. However, amidst the rising popularity and speculation, a chilling unease snaked its way into Alex's heart. The thought was absurd, he told himself, shaking off the unsettling feeling. After all, why would a notorious serial killer call into a podcast? But as Alex was about to discover, the world of crime and horror was often stranger than fiction. Little did he know that his pursuit of truth would lead him down a dangerous path, where the voice in the dark would become a harbinger of his worst nightmares. John Doe became a recurring character on Voices in the Dark. The episodes featuring his calls became the most anticipated ones, each call adding another layer to the enigma. John Doe's insights went beyond the Moonlight Sonata killer. He shared his thoughts on other cold cases too, his understanding of the criminal mind consistently surprising Alex and his audience. However, as the weeks rolled on, John's insights began to take a darker turn. His tone, once analytical, began to have an unsettling edge. He spoke about the killers not as separate entities, but as individuals who were misunderstood, driven by urges that ordinary people couldn't fathom. He began describing crime scenes with a disconcerting attention to detail, as though he was present, soaking in the horror and the thrill of it all. The change in John was subtle, but enough to put Alex on edge. The unsettling undercurrents in John's calls and the nagging question of his identity led Alex to contact the local police. He shared his recordings, hoping they could provide insight or even identify the mysterious caller. But despite their best efforts, they came up empty-handed. They found no match for the voice, and John Doe had done an excellent job of covering his digital tracks. Undeterred, Alex reached out to a cybercrime unit, hoping they could trace John's calls. Once again, his attempts were fruitless. Whoever John Doe was, he was meticulous and well-versed in masking his identity. Each dead end only fueled Alex's fascination and apprehension. There was a disconcerting feeling of being watched, of being drawn into a game he didn't understand. His journalistic instincts were at war with his growing fear. Each ring of the phone brought a rush of anticipation and a pang of dread. Would it be John? What would he reveal this time? During his investigation into John Doe, Alex started receiving anonymous emails. They contained snippets of information about unsolved cases, pieces of a puzzle that seemed to point towards a larger, darker web. They were all signed with the same chilling sign-off, from the shadows, John Doe. As the days bled into weeks, Alex found himself caught in an insidious web spun by his enigmatic caller. His once exciting podcast had transformed into a nightmarish reality, the voices in the dark becoming all too real. The fear was slowly but surely creeping in, tainting his once-beloved work with a sense of impending doom. Even his audience began picking up on the change. The messages flooded in, split between concern for Alex and an insatiable curiosity about John Doe. The theories became wilder, darker, mirroring the growing unease. The podcast had always been about true crime, but now it seemed true crime had infiltrated the podcast. Despite the rising terror, Alex remained committed to uncovering John Doe's identity. He was a journalist at heart, and his pursuit of truth outweighed his fear. He was determined to unravel this mystery, even as the lines between the hunter and the hunted began to blur. Determined to unmask John Doe, Alex began his investigation parallel to the calls. His small home office was soon a testament to his growing obsession. A web of notes and pictures, maps marking cold case locations, and timelines pinned to the corkboard. Alex pored over old case files, hunting for a clue, a connection that could link John Doe to the chilling crimes discussed in his podcast. He listened and re-listened to John's calls, dissecting each word, each nuance in his voice. He went over his tips to the police, the insights John had provided, looking for any detail that might point to his identity. He spent countless hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers, tracing the city's history, delving into old unsolved cases. His conversations with retired cops, former journalists, and victims' families painted a disturbing picture, yet offered no concrete leads. Alex began noticing a few threads that connected some unsolved cases, a similar modus operandi, an overlapping timeline, and victims with shared traits. He compiled a list of these linked cases, some of which were crimes John had spoken about. However, it was an offhand remark by an old beat cop about a victim who loved classical music that caught his attention. She was a pianist who was known to practice late into the night, her favorite piece being the Moonlight Sonata. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as he realized this victim's case coincided with the timeline of the Moonlight Sonata killer. Alongside the investigation, Alex started experiencing strange occurrences. There were times he felt watched, an unsettling prickling at the back of his neck. Late at night, he heard odd noises, soft footsteps outside his house, the faint echo of a melody that he thought was the wind, but sounded hauntingly similar to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. He found objects in his house slightly misplaced. His notes shuffled, a mug moved, his laptop screen left open on a case file. Each incident could have been brushed off as forgetfulness, but together, they filled Alex with a dreadful certainty that he wasn't alone. As the evidence piled up, the line between paranoia and reality began to blur. Alex's once mundane life was now tinged with a sense of dread. The suspicion that John Doe might be closer than he imagined turned his world into a terrifying chessboard, where he felt more like a pawn than a player, but the fear didn't deter him. If anything, it steeled his resolve. He was Alex Thompson, the man who had faced corruption and crime head-on. He wouldn't be deterred by a faceless voice, however chilling it might be. Armed with his investigative skills and a stubborn streak, Alex vowed to unmask John Doe, to drag him into the light from the shadows where he lurked. Little did he know, the shadows were deeper and darker than he imagined. Absolutely. Let's delve into this chilling turning point. The day was stormy, a portentous gloom hanging over the city. As Alex arrived at his studio, a package sat ominously on his desk, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address, no distinguishing marks. Just a box and his name, written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. A cold dread slithered its way into Alex's gut as he stared at the box. His mind immediately raced to the gruesome symbol of the Moonlight Sonata killer, the headphones. Was this his sick way of claiming his next victim? He stood frozen for a moment, the room oppressively silent, save for the rain lashing against the window. His eyes remained glued to the package, 1,000 questions buzzing in his head. Finally, with a shaky breath, he moved to open it. Alex felt his heartbeat in his throat as he slowly unwrapped the package, the air thick with tension. The box creaked open, revealing nothing. It was empty. Alex blinked at the emptiness, his heart pounding in his chest, a rush of relief washing over him. His relief, however, was short-lived. His gaze fell on the inside of the box, where Moonlight Sonata was written in the same neat handwriting. The box was a message, a terrifying declaration from the killer himself. The Moonlight Sonata killer was playing a game, and Alex was his chosen adversary. His mind echoed with John Doe's chilling voice, his cryptic comments, his unnerving knowledge about the killer. The pieces of the terrifying puzzle were falling into place, their picture far more horrifying than Alex had ever imagined. As the reality of his situation sank in, fear coiled around Alex like a shroud. He was no longer just a podcaster or a journalist seeking truth. He was a part of the narrative, the next chapter in the chilling saga of the Moonlight Sonata killer. The voices in the dark had become a stark reality, a reality Alex was unprepared for, but he had no choice but to confront it. As he sat in his studio, the echo of Moonlight Sonata playing in his mind, Alex knew he was in the sights of a predator, his life hanging by a thread. It was another night of voices in the dark, a night that would become the most haunting in Alex's life. The topic of the evening was the recent discovery related to the Moonlight Sonata killer. The chilling message delivered through the empty box. Alex started the live session, his voice steady despite the underlying tension. He recounted the eerie events, the package, and the chilling message it contained. The atmosphere was heavy, a sense of anticipation pervading the airwaves. As the discussion evolved, the familiar voice echoed through the line. "Hello, Alex." The voice made Alex's blood run cold. "John Doe." John's voice held an edge that night, a thinly veiled menace. "You know, Alex, I've always admired your work, your dedication to unmasking the truth. But did you ever wonder about the cost?" Alex frowned, a chill running down his spine. "What do you mean, John?" "You see, in this dance of ours we've become intertwined. Your pursuit of truth, my pursuit of perfection. We're two sides of the same coin, Alex." The line crackled with ominous silence. John's words hung in the air, their implications slowly dawning on Alex. A terrifying realization gripped him. John Doe was the Moonlight Sonata killer. Before Alex could respond, John continued. "Your dedication to this game has been admirable, Alex. I'm impressed. So much so that I feel it's time we met face to face." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. What are you saying, John?" There was a dark chuckle on the other end. "I'm saying, Alex, I'll be seeing you very soon." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alex in a stunned silence. His heart raced, his mind in turmoil. John Doe, the intriguing caller, was the Moonlight Sonata killer. The man who had been terrorizing the city for years was the same man who had been speaking with him, sharing insights, playing a deadly game that Alex was unknowingly a part of. His studio, once a sanctuary of stories and truths, now felt like a stage set for a horrifying confrontation. The realization that he was not just chasing a story, but was now a part of it, was a hard pill to swallow. John Doe's final call had set the stage for a chilling climax. As Alex sat in his studio, the silence amplifying his pounding heartbeat, he understood the grave danger he was in. The voices in the dark were not just stories anymore. They were a chilling reality. And he was at the epicenter, waiting for the arrival of a killer. Alex was on autopilot as he tried to wrap up the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on Voices in the Dark. Be safe out there. His voice was shaking, and he quickly switched off the live feed, his hands trembling. In a panic, he fumbled for his phone, his fingers hastily typing in the emergency number. He had to alert the police, had to let them know that the killer was on his way. But before he could press dial, a slow, haunting creak echoed through the room. Alex froze, his blood turning to ice as the familiar sound of the studio door reached his ears. Slowly, he turned around, his heart pounding in his chest, the blood roaring in his ears. Standing in the doorway was a figure, silhouetted against the dim light filtering in from the hallway. "Hello, Alex," a voice echoed, the same voice that had haunted him for weeks, the voice of John Doe. Alex's breath hitched as he stared at the man before him. "John," he whispered, his voice barely a croak. John chuckled, a chilling sound that made Alex's skin crawl. "Finally, we meet face to face," he said, slowly stepping into the room, the door closing behind him with a haunting thud. Alex was paralyzed with fear, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to move. He watched as John approached him, a predator closing in on its prey. John Doe was just as ordinary as his pseudonym suggested, an average man that you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But the cold smile on his face, the maniacal glint in his eyes, they told a different story. Without another word, John lunged at Alex, his movements swift and decisive. Alex didn't even have time to react. One moment he was standing, staring at the man he had unknowingly invited into his life, and the next, he was on the ground, his vision blurring, a searing pain in his neck. As his lifeblood drained away, Alex saw John pick up the empty box from the desk, a sadistic smile playing on his lips. The last thing Alex felt was his head being lifted, and then darkness. His eyes, once full of curiosity and intelligence, now held a lifeless gaze, their last sight being the box that had served as the precursor to his end. His head was placed gently into the box, a grotesque end to the terrifying game. John Doe stood in the now silent studio, the lifeless body of Alex Thompson at his feet. The once bustling podcast studio, the platform for the voice of truth, had turned into a gruesome crime scene, the final chapter of Voices in the Dark. "Good night, Alex," John murmured, a chilling farewell to the man who had unknowingly become his latest victim. The lights of the studio flickered out, plunging the room into darkness, the echo of Moonlight Sonata serving as a haunting lullaby. The final episode of Voices in the Dark had come to an end, and with it, the life of Alex Thompson. In his pursuit of truth, he had gotten too close to the darkness and paid the ultimate price. The silence that followed was a chilling testament to the terror of the Moonlight Sonata killer, a haunting melody that would echo through the city for years to come. I hope you enjoyed our episode. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you, our brave listeners. Your presence in this shared journey into the unknown is what fuels our stories. Your fascination is our motivation. Did this episode send chills down your spine? Leave your comments, share your thoughts, your theories, your own midnight mysteries. Your feedback is the beacon that guides us through the uncharted territories of our stories. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our channel. By joining the Midnight Mystery family, you won't miss out on a single chilling tale. As a subscriber, you'll be the first to know when a new episode lurks around the corner, ready to pull you back into the shadowy depths of the unknown. This is the Midnight Mystery signing off, leaving you with a simple reminder. When the clock strikes 12, fear the silence, for that's when our tales come to life. Good night, Midnight listeners, and remember, not all who wander into the dark are lost.